Welcome to The Neighborhood, a Mr. Rogers tribute podcast. I'm your host, Rick Lee James, of rickleejames.com, and I run the Mr. Rogers Quotes Twitter account found at Mr. Rogers Say. As we again walk into this podcast neighborhood, we want you to know that no matter where you are from, you are welcome here. I'm glad to be your neighbor. Every daughter, every son, every tribe, and every tongue, in the spirit of Fred Rogers and the life of welcome that he lived, welcome to the neighborhood. This week in the neighborhood, our subject is the rarely seen holiday special, Christmastime with Mr. Rogers. In 1953, after working for a few years in New York City, Fred Rogers moved back home to Pennsylvania. Mr. Rogers had been working at NBC, learning his craft on commercial television, but he wanted to make something more enriching and fulfilling for younger television viewers. In Pittsburgh, he found a job at public television station WQED on a show called The Children's Corner. It was on The Children's Corner that Fred Rogers introduced puppets like King Friday the 13th, X the Owl, and Daniel Striped Tiger. Through the 1950s, Fred developed his friendly real-life persona into his friendly real-life television persona. In 1966, on WQED, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood made its TV premiere. As we know, the show, populated with Sperry topsider sneakers, cardigan sweaters, puppets, trolley, and Fred Rogers himself, became a TV classic and a warm, welcoming, vital staple for children all over the land. But after a decade of making the shows, Fred Rogers needed to take a breather. In 1976, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood went on a 3-year hiatus. But you can't keep friendly Fred Rogers away from make-believe for too long. 1 year in the show's hiatus, our sweater-loving neighbor took a break from his vacation so that he could film the rarely seen special, Christmastime with Mr. Rogers. It would be the only Christmas special that he ever made in his long career. Now, even though the episode was titled Christmastime with Mr. Rogers, it might be more appropriately labeled as a holiday special. Ever inclusive, Mr. Rogers celebrated Hanukkah, singing the song I Have a Little Dreidel. And even as he also welcomed children who had other faith traditions or even no faith traditions at all. The trolley was decorated with a maroon velvet reading that said Happy Hanukkah on one side and Merry Christmas on the other. This episode has rarely been seen, and because I was not able to find any place to watch it personally, I'm going to let neighborhoodarchive.com, a wonderful Fred Rogers resource, provide us with a description of this episode. This is how it went. Mr. Rogers greets several of his neighbors as he walks through his neighborhood on the way to his television house. Mr. McFeely gives him a box with instructions not to open it until he has reached the house and changed his sweater. Waiting to do so, Mr. Rogers finds a new pair of sneakers, just what he needed, and a Christmas card from the McFeelys. Thankful for the gift from his friends, Mr. Rogers talks about his Christmas wish for viewers. He says, I've been thinking about what I'd like to give you for Christmas. I'd really like to give you something that just fits your own wishes and needs the way these shoes just fit me. I suppose the thing I'd like most to be able to give you is hope. Hope that through your own doing and your own living with others, you'll be able to find what best fits for you in this life. But this hour of television is something I can give you, and we all hope you'll feel very welcome. After 3 young carolers sings We Wish You a Merry Christmas outside Mr. Rogers' window, he receives a phone call from Mrs. McFeely letting him know that Mr. McFeely will be stopping by. As he waits, Mr. Rogers remembers many special people who have visited his neighborhood over the years. Mr. McFeely stops by on his way to the rehearsal for the holiday get-together. He mentions that Stephanie, a young girl in the neighborhood who will be performing, is quite disappointed that her family may miss the get-together due to car trouble. Well, Mr. Rogers goes with Mr. McFeely to the rehearsal, where Stephanie shares her disappointment with Mr. Rogers. Francois Clemens details a recent dream where the members of his traveling choir all lost their voices. In the dream, the choir experiences trouble with their bus as they travel and are helped by the music man, a magical musician who sings "Rise Up, Shepherds, and Follow" as Francois Clemens works on the broken bus. Francois Clemens is surprised to find that the music man is able to provide the children with the ability to play music without any instruments. As they play, Mr. Clemens sings "Silent Night." Stephanie joins Mr. Rogers as he returns to his house, where they talk about how hard it is to wait for things you are looking forward to. Mrs. Hamilton stops by to borrow some eggs, but Mr. Rogers does not have enough. After a quick call to Chef Brockett, Mrs. Hamilton is gone as quickly as she has arrived. Stephanie makes up a story about the music man helping Mrs. Hamilton, finding some eggs for her cake after her stubborn hens give her none. Mr. Rogers opens a gift from a friend, a small banner that says "Merry Christmas" on one side and "Happy Hanukkah" on the other. Taking out a dreidel, Mr. Rogers spends some time talking about Hanukkah as he plays and sings the dreidel song. In the neighborhood of make-believe, presents are not to be opened until King Friday gives his permission. Lady Elaine shares with Handyman Negri that she is upset that she has received only one present. When Mr. McFeely arrives with several packages to deliver, Lady Aberlin and Handyman Negri offer to help him as Lady Elaine is left with her frustrations. As the presents are delivered, Lady Elaine finds that the others in the neighborhood have received many more presents than she has. To show her feelings at being slighted, she turns everything in the neighborhood upside down. Everything except the music man, who is able to use his magic stick to keep himself right side up. Everything returns to normal when the music man gives Lady Elaine an ice skating experience, a gift that does not need to be wrapped. When King Friday gives the word, presents are allowed to be opened throughout the neighborhood, the first being a Christmas decoration for Lady Elaine put together in parts by all of her neighbors. Back at the house, Mr. Rogers talks about different families' traditions, Christmas, Hanukkah, and those who celebrate neither. He suggests that all presents are a sign of love. Stephanie makes up another story about the music man who finds himself in a remote village where a young boy is missing. When the boy's father and sister, the music man searches the open land. Climbing to the highest point they can find, they sing "My Sheep Were Grazing," which is heard by the lost boy. Following the sound of their voices, the boy finds his way home. At the get-together, everyone sings "Joy to the World" as Stephanie prepares for her performance. She is overjoyed when Stanley Clay arrives with her family. As everyone sings "The Friendly Beast," Stephanie proudly performs her dance on the stage. Returning to the house, Mr. Rogers concludes, "I, for one, wish you good memories of this holiday, and I hope you'll be able to look for all the different ways that people have of showing that they love you." Well, thank you to the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood Archive for that description. I'm grateful for it, and I really wish I could see that episode one day. But how about a few fun facts about this episode, which I found online? In Christmastime with Mr. Rogers, we learn that the holiday season is called, and please excuse me if I mess this up, it's a very long and difficult word. The holiday season is called Sloppery Doza Fanoon da Puck. In the neighborhood of make-believe, anyway, That's what the holiday season is called. According to King Friday, that translates to what a difference one person can make. Also, Frances Bay guest stars as Franny Hamilton, a neighbor who pops up to borrow eggs. Some might remember her as Fonzie's grandmother, Grandma Nussbaum, on Happy Days. Or maybe you remember her as the grandma in the movie Happy Gilmore. Well, another fun fact. The Christmastime with Mr. Rogers special even busts a common myth about Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. It has been said that Mr. Rogers and Mr. McFeely only shake hands in the final episode of the series, but that isn't so. The two men also shook hands here on this episode when it aired in December 1977. There's another fun fact about Christmastime with Mr. Rogers. Unlike most holiday specials, there isn't any snow in the neighborhood during this show. In fact, it's so warm that Francois Clemens is seen sitting outside enjoying a cold beverage during the show's opening segment. And speaking of our friend Francois Clemens, in the special, he leads a children's choir that bears the punny name, the OK Chorale, spelled O-K-A-Y-C-H-O-R-A-L-E. I guess they weren't terrible and they weren't great. They were just okay. Well, those are some fun facts about Christmastime with Mr. Rogers, the Christmas special. But I want to close this episode by going back to its very clear and very simple message once more. I want to quote Fred Rogers once again, the same quote I shared earlier in the show. He says, "I've been thinking about what I'd like to give you for Christmas. I'd really like to give you something that just fits your own wishes and needs the way these shoes just fit me. I suppose the thing I'd like most to be able to give you is hope. Hope that through your own doing and your own living with others, you'll be able to find what best fits for you in this life. I, for one, wish you good memories of this holiday, and I hope you'll be able to look for all the different ways that people have of showing that they love you." I love that quote. You know, along with our favorite neighbor, Fred Rogers, I too want to wish all of you listening hope in this holiday season and beyond. I think hope can be hard to find these days. Sometimes it seems like an act of defiance just to have hope in times like ours when racial, political, and religious divisions separate us so relentlessly. But I want to encourage you, my friends. Please don't give up on hope. Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us that everything that is done in this world is done by hope. Fred Rogers' dear friend, Henry Nouwen, said, "Hope means to keep living amid desperation and to keep humming in the darkness." And I want to challenge you to let hope be the song that makes you dance even when you can't get your feet to move. I beg you to join me and the residents of this podcast neighborhood and our Twitter neighborhood at Mr. Rogers Say in a covenant that we will not let the light of hope die, that we will hold up the light of hope in the darkness, because even the deepest darkness has to flee with the light of just a single lit match. That is a powerful truth. And I don't know what you celebrate or if you celebrate at all during this time of year. You might celebrate Christmas, you might celebrate Hanukkah, you might celebrate Kwanzaa, Diwali, winter solstice, or a number of other holidays, or you may not even celebrate a holiday at all, but I want you to know that I'm glad you're my neighbor. And I have so much hope because of the hope that I see in you. I see it every day on that Twitter account that I run at Mr. Rogers Say. I see it in wonderful emails that I get from you. I see it in the way that you interact with each other. And I believe that hope can bring change to this world. Well, because I personally am a Christian, and one way that Christians tend to celebrate is to give gifts, and because Fred Rogers also was a Christian, I want to close this episode by sharing a gift with you. And truthfully, it's an invisible gift that Fred Rogers gave again and again. And I'm just going to let Fred deliver this gift to you because it really is a gift that he first shared with us. And I just want to share his hopeful gift with you. Thank you for listening to Welcome to the Neighborhood. I wish you very well this holiday season. I hope that you'll receive this gift from me as I have received it from Fred Rogers, as he gave it again and again and again.
We just don't get to be competent human beings without a lot of different investments from others. I'd like to give you all an invisible gift. A gift of a silent minute to think about those who have helped you become who you are today. Some of them may be here right now. Some may be far away. Some, like my astronomy professor, may even be in heaven. But wherever they are, if they've loved you and encouraged you and wanted what was best in life for you, they're right inside yourself. And I feel that you deserve quiet time on this special occasion to devote some thought to them. So let's just take a minute in honor of those who have cared about us all along the way. One silent minute. Whomever you've been thinking about, imagine how grateful they must be that during your silent times you remember how important they are to you.
Thank you for joining me here this week in the neighborhood. Music featured on the podcast was Nouvelle Noel by Kevin MacLeod, and all other music was by Benjamin Tossett at bensound.com. And I also want to thank the @Mr. Rogers Say community on Twitter. I'm your host, Rick Lee James. My Twitter account is @RickLeeJames. My website is rickleejames.com, and my other podcast is Voices in My Head, the Rick Lee James podcast. By the way, this is a free podcast, and it will always be free to you. But if you've been enjoying this show and you want to find out how you can help me to keep making more shows like it, well, please visit this website. It's patreon.com/RickLeeJames. Again, that's patreon.com/RickLeeJames. For $5 a month, you can literally help me to continue my work making podcasts like this one by helping me to pay for production costs, website fees, hosting fees, doing research, marketing materials, and so much more. Thank you for any help that you might be able to give. And if you can't help, that's great too. But if you have a chance, check out patreon.com/RickLeeJames. Well, I look forward to being with you again next time. But until then, remember, you make each day a special day. You know how? By just your being you. There's only one person in this whole world like you, and people can like you exactly as you are.